The school hallway was buzzing with activity. Laughter echoed off the lockers, and students rushed between classes, their voices a cacophony of teenage energy. Jaden, a quiet but confident black teen, walked through the sea of students, his books clutched tightly to his chest. He wasn't one to make a scene, preferring to keep his head down and focus on his studies, but there was something about him, an inner confidence, that kept people from trying to mess with him. As he moved down the crowded hallway, his thoughts were interrupted by a sudden voice, sharp and mocking. "Look who it is! The nerd who thinks he belongs here!" Troy sneered, stepping in front of Jaden with his usual group of friends flanking him. The air around them seemed to shift as they blocked his path, their smug smiles daring Jaden to say something. Jaden's grip tightened on his books, but his face remained calm. He knew what this was. Troy and his group of bullies had always been like this. They thrived on power, intimidation, and making others feel small. "Move, Troy. I don't have time for this," Jaden replied, his voice calm and unwavering. The hallway fell silent, the usual hustle and bustle around them halting as the students nearby watched the confrontation unfold. Troy's smirk faltered for a moment. This was new. No one ever talked back to him like that. It was always the other way around. The tension was palpable as Troy glanced at his friends, then back at Jaden, his expression shifting from surprise to a cold grin. "You think you're tough, huh?" Troy taunted, stepping closer, his voice dripping with venom. "Maybe we should teach you a lesson then." Jaden didn't flinch. His heart was steady, but his mind raced. The group of bullies closed in on him, a dangerous circle of laughter and threats. Jaden could feel the eyes of the students around him, waiting for him to react, hoping for drama. Troy's friends took a step forward, looking at Jaden with mock sympathy, ready to back up their leader. The bullies had cornered him. This wasn't just about teasing anymore. They were looking to humiliate him in front of everyone, to remind him of his place in their world. But Jaden stood firm. He wasn't scared. He wasn't going to let them push him around. His thoughts flashed to his family, his mother, his sister, and his dad, who had always taught him to rise above, to stand up for what was right, no matter what. "Do what you want," Jaden said quietly, his voice steady, eyes never leaving Troy's. "But I'm not the one you need to worry about." Troy's smirk faltered for just a moment, his friends hesitating as the tension stretched on. Jaden could feel the weight of their eyes, their judgment, but he refused to show fear. He was calm, collected, and in control. And somewhere, in the back of his mind, a thought lingered. They have no idea who I really am. Jaden stood his ground, unwavering. The group of bullies was closing in, but his posture remained calm, his eyes steady, never showing the fear they expected. The hallway was thick with tension, a kind of charged silence that hung between Jaden and Troy. "I said, move," Jaden repeated, his voice calm but firm. There was no fear in him, just resolve. He wasn't going to let Troy push him around. Not today, not ever. But Troy wasn't about to back down. With a sneer, he reached out and snatched the books from Jaden's hands, throwing them across the hallway. The sound of the books hitting the ground echoed in the silence, and the crowd of students gasped. Phones came out instantly. This wasn't just a random confrontation anymore. This was becoming a spectacle. Everyone could feel the drama unfolding. Jaden's fists clenched at his sides. The rage was there, building inside him, but he didn't move. He didn't lash out. He knew it would only make things worse. If he fought back now, it would be his word against theirs. They'd twist the story to make him the villain. So, he kept his composure. He dropped to the floor to gather his books, trying to ignore the laughter and jeers from Troy and his friends. His heart pounded, but his expression remained neutral, his mind focused. Fighting back in the heat of the moment wasn't the solution. Just as Jaden was about to pick up the last of his books, a teacher, Mr. Harris, approached. Jaden felt a small glimmer of hope. Maybe someone would step in, someone who would make the bullies stop, someone who would do the right thing. But as Mr. Harris walked up, instead of stopping the bullying, he just scoffed. "Boys will be boys," Mr. Harris muttered, shaking his head, as if Jaden's pain was nothing more than a passing inconvenience. "Jaden, stop making trouble. These boys are just messing around." Jaden's stomach dropped. The teacher wasn't here to help. He was dismissing Jaden's feelings, making him the one in the wrong for standing up for himself. Jaden's eyes burned with anger. The injustice of it was too much to bear. But he knew there was no point in arguing with Mr. Harris. He had already chosen a side. As Jaden picked up his last book, trying to keep his head down and his anger in check, Troy leaned in, his face inches from Jaden's. The scent of his cologne mixed with the sharpness of his words. "You don't belong here, nerd," Troy whispered, his voice low but filled with venom. Jaden's heart raced, and for a moment he considered lashing out. He could feel the heat rising in his chest, the impulse to show Troy that he wasn't scared, but he knew better. Fighting back in this moment wouldn't do anything but fuel Troy's fire. Instead, Jaden stood up, books clutched tightly against his chest, and locked eyes with Troy. His voice was steady, unwavering. "I do belong here, Troy, and you'll find that out soon enough." The words hung in the air, and for a split second, it looked like Troy might snap. But instead he stepped back, the smirk returning to his face. "Whatever," Troy muttered, turning to his friends. "Let's get out of here." As they walked away, Jaden's fists unclenched, the tension slowly draining from his body. But it wasn't over. Troy might have left, but the anger, the frustration, and the injustice still burned within Jaden. His hands still trembled with the force of everything he had just endured. He had stood up for himself, but in this world, that often didn't mean much. The crowd that had gathered, those who had pulled out their phones, were still there, watching him as he walked down the hallway. Some were sympathetic, others indifferent, and a few even had the audacity to laugh. Jaden walked on, determined not to let them see how much it hurt. But inside, he knew something had to change. This wasn't how things were supposed to be. This wasn't how he was supposed to feel in a place that was supposed to be for learning, for growth. As he reached the classroom, he pushed open the door and slipped inside, trying to shake off the events of the hallway. But the sting of Troy's words still lingered, and he knew deep down that this wouldn't be the last time he would face this. But one thing was for sure: he wasn't going to back down. Not anymore. That evening, after the school day had ended, Jaden sat quietly in his room, the weight of the day still pressing on his shoulders. His books sat scattered on his desk, untouched. He couldn't focus on his homework. Instead, his mind kept replaying the events from earlier, the way Troy and his friends had mocked him, the way Mr. Harris had brushed it all off as nothing more than boys being boys. Jaden wasn't one to show his emotions easily, but the anger inside him was undeniable. He felt humiliated, small, and worst of all, he felt like no one cared. The teachers, the students, everyone just let the bullies get away with it. He wanted to scream, but what good would that do? Finally, Jaden couldn't keep it to himself any longer. He stood up and walked downstairs to where his father, Mr. Carter, was sitting on the couch reading the newspaper. His dad was calm, composed, and always had a way of seeing things clearly. "Hey, Dad, can we talk?" Jaden's voice was quieter than usual, filled with frustration and a sense of helplessness. Mr. Carter looked up from his paper, a small smile on his face. "Of course, son. What's on your mind?" Jaden sat down beside him, his fists clenching as he spoke. "It's those guys at school, Troy and his gang. They humiliated me today. Even the teachers let them get away with it. Mr. Harris didn't do anything when he saw it happening. He just told me to stop making trouble." His voice shook with frustration, the weight of it all finally coming out in a rush. Mr. Carter listened intently, his eyes never leaving Jayden. He didn't interrupt, letting his son vent, as he always did. When Jayden finally stopped talking, Mr. Carter leaned back in his chair, a calm smile spreading across his face. "Did you get it on video?" Mr. Carter asked, his voice low but with an edge of sharpness that caught Jayden off guard. Jayden blinked, confused. "What?" "My friend, Michael, recorded everything," Jayden said after a moment of realization. "He always carries his phone around." Mr. Carter's smile widened slightly, a glint of something more powerful in his eyes. "Well then, son, you just handed them their own lawsuit." Jayden's confusion deepened. "What do you mean?" "What lawsuit?" Mr. Carter leaned forward slightly, his posture now entirely different. The relaxed dad who had been listening to Jayden's frustrations was now the lawyer he had always been, sharp, focused, and calculating. "Son," Mr. Carter said, his voice calm but filled with authority, "I'm not just any lawyer. I specialize in taking down corruption, including schools that ignore bullying." Jayden blinked, processing the words slowly. "Wait, what?" Mr. Carter grinned. "The fact that Troy and his buddies thought they could get away with bullying you, and the fact that Mr. Harris let it happen, that's called negligence. And with that video, we have proof. We can sue the school for failing to protect you. We can go after them for not stepping in when it was their job to do so." Jayden's jaw dropped. "Dad, you're serious?" Mr. Carter nodded. "Dead serious. And trust me, Jayden, this isn't just about getting back at Troy and his friends. It's about showing the school, showing everyone, that bullying like this won't be tolerated, that they can't let it slide anymore, not with a clear violation of your rights." The weight of the situation began to settle on Jayden's shoulders, and a slow, tentative smile crossed his face. For the first time today, he felt a surge of hope. The kind of hope that came with the knowledge that maybe, just maybe, the bullies wouldn't get away with this. "You'd really do that, Dad?" Jayden asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Mr. Carter placed a reassuring hand on his son's shoulder. "Of course, son. I'll always have your back, but this is bigger than just you and me. This is about standing up for what's right, for everyone who's ever been too scared to stand up to a bully. We'll make sure they know that no one is above the law." Jayden sat back in his chair, stunned, but thrilled by the thought of what could come next. He had always known his dad was a powerful lawyer, but he hadn't realized just how much power he actually held. The bullies had messed with the wrong kid. Jayden wasn't just going to walk away this time. "Thanks, Dad," Jayden said quietly, a sense of gratitude welling up inside him. "I didn't know what to do before, but now I feel like I can actually do something." Mr. Carter's eyes softened and he gave his son a proud smile. "You've always had that strength, Jayden. Sometimes you just need to believe in it." The two sat there for a moment, the weight of the situation settling in. Jayden knew the path ahead wouldn't be easy. It would take courage, strength, and a fight he hadn't expected to be part of. But with his dad on his side, he felt ready for it. As Jayden stood up to leave, Mr. Carter's voice stopped him. "Remember, son," Mr. Carter called, "this isn't just about one bully or one incident. It's about showing the world that standing up for yourself, for others, is something worth fighting for." Jayden nodded. He could feel the power of his father's words and knew that he wasn't just fighting for justice, he was fighting for respect, and that, he thought, was worth more than anything else. The next morning, Jayden walked into school with his dad, his heart pounding with a mixture of nerves and excitement. Today was the day. Today, he wasn't going to let the bullies win. He had his father by his side, and that made all the difference. As they entered the school, the air felt different. There was a sense of power, a sense of impending change. Jayden had always felt small, invisible in the face of bullying, but now, as he walked next to his dad, It was as if he was walking into a whole new world. Mr. Carter was calm, his demeanor cool and confident as they made their way through the hallways. Jaden couldn't help but glance at the other students, most of whom were already whispering about what was happening. Word had spread fast. When they reached the principal's office, Mr. Carter didn't hesitate. He walked straight in, the door opening with a soft creak. Inside, Troy and his parents were already seated, looking smug and self-assured, clearly under the impression that Jaden had called for help because he was the one in trouble. Their arrogance was palpable. Troy's dad, a man with a deep, condescending smile, turned to Mr. Carter as he entered. "So, you called a lawyer?" "Cute," Troy's dad sneered, leaning back in his chair. "Let's get this over with." Mr. Carter didn't flinch. He simply walked to the desk, set down a thick folder, and looked straight at Troy's father, then at the principal. "This is a lawsuit for failure to protect students from harassment, racial discrimination, and negligence," Mr. Carter said calmly. His voice was measured, but there was a power behind it that made the words land heavy in the room. "Your son, and this school, are about to be in serious trouble." Troy's smirk evaporated instantly. His eyes widened as he looked from Mr. Carter to the folder on the desk, realizing for the first time that he wasn't the one in control of this situation. The mood in the room shifted dramatically. Troy's father's face turned pale, his earlier bravado vanishing in the blink of an eye. He looked like he had just realized the gravity of what was about to happen. The principal, who had been sitting quietly behind his desk, swallowed hard and cleared his throat. Mr. Carter," he stammered, his voice shaky. "Let's not be hasty. I'm sure we can come to an agreement." But Mr. Carter wasn't having any of it. He slid a small USB drive across the desk, its metallic surface catching the light. The room fell silent as the drive sat there like a ticking time bomb. "I've got 5 media outlets ready to expose this situation if action isn't taken today," Mr. Carter said, his voice cold and unwavering. The tension in the room was suffocating. Troy's dad looked at the USB drive, then back at Mr. Carter, his face pale, his arrogance completely gone. The principal's eyes flicked between the drive and Mr. Carter, clearly shaken by the weight of the moment. There was no denying the reality of the situation now. Mr. Carter had them cornered. He wasn't just an ordinary lawyer, he was a force to be reckoned with, and they were about to feel the full impact of their negligence. The silence stretched out, thick and heavy. The principal swallowed hard, his face a mixture of fear and regret. He knew exactly what this meant. The power had shifted completely, and in that moment, Jaden felt something he had never felt before: satisfaction. He wasn't the victim anymore. He was the one holding the power, with his father leading the charge. Mr. Carter turned to Jaden, a proud smile flickering on his face, before turning back to Troy's father and the principal. "I suggest we fix this immediately," he said, his tone final. Troy's father had nothing to say. His earlier smugness had completely evaporated. He could do nothing now but sit there in stunned silence, watching as Mr. Carter took control of the room. Jaden stood tall beside his father, his heart still racing, but now with the knowledge that this battle was his to win. It wasn't just about standing up to Troy anymore. It was about justice. It was about making sure this kind of bullying never went unchecked again. And with his father's help, that was exactly what was going to happen. In the weeks that followed, everything changed. Troy was suspended for his actions, his arrogance and cruelty no longer tolerated by the school system. His father, once so confident and condescending, was now begging to settle out of court, desperately trying to avoid the public humiliation that would come with the lawsuit. The corrupt teacher, Mr. Harris, was placed under investigation for his failure to act when he saw bullying happening under his watch. The school board finally realized the gravity of the situation, and a strict set of anti-bullying policies was swiftly implemented to prevent any further mistreatment of students. No longer would kids like Jaden be left to fend for themselves while bullies ran rampant. It was a victory, not just for Jaden, but for every student who had ever been overlooked, ignored, or mistreated. The changes were tangible, and justice had been served. One day, Jaden walked through the school hallway, his head held high. The once overlooked, quiet student had transformed into someone to be respected. Heads turned as he passed by. Whispers followed him, but this time, they weren't about him being an easy target. They were about the fact that Jaden had taken a stand, and now everyone knew it. Troy was gone. The bullies who had once laughed at him no longer dared to mess with him. The world felt different, like a new chapter was beginning. But just as Jaden was about to head to his class, he noticed something. A new kid, slightly younger, a little smaller, was being pushed around by a group of students. The scene was all too familiar. Jaden paused for a moment, watching the bullies get closer to their victim. He felt that familiar surge of anger, but this time, it was tempered by the knowledge that he didn't have to stand by. With a smirk, Jaden stepped forward. His voice rang out, confident and calm. "Not on my watch." The bullies froze, their smug faces quickly turning to confusion and hesitation. They didn't know who Jaden was now, the kid who stood up and never backed down. They weren't about to mess with him. And just like that, Jaden had become the protector, the one who made sure the cycle of bullying was broken. He wasn't just surviving school anymore. He was changing it. The hallway, once filled with whispers of mockery, now buzzed with a quiet respect. Jaden had earned it, and with that one phrase, he made sure everyone knew. Justice was served.